This movie is the first in a series of movies on charts, an introduction to charts. We're going to begin by looking at a chart and looking at all the components that make up a chart. And then we're going to look at the two main ways in which you can create a chart, either have it exist on its own on what's called a chart sheet, where you only have that chart displayed on the worksheet, or you can embed a chart within another worksheet that contains perhaps other content. And then we're going to talk about the main types of charts and make a bunch of charts along the way. I've got a rather busy worksheet set up here with a chart in the center, and I have some data to the left and the bottom of the worksheet. And on the right side, I have a list of the 15 main types of charts. At the end of the day, a chart is nothing more than a collection of objects. And each one of these objects is selectable, movable, deletable, and formattable. They're contained within what's called the chart area, which acts as the canvas for the chart. The biggest component within the chart area usually is the plot area. The plot area is where the data points are plotted. The plot area on this chart is two-dimensional, but there are many styles of charts that are three-dimensional that gives you some depth to the display of the information. But the plot area is where the data points are plotted. The data that I use to create this chart is here, and the data includes some non-numerical data and some numerical data or values. Generally speaking, the non-numerical data, and in this case it's the months of the year, make up the horizontal axis, or many times what's called the category axis. And the numerical data, called the data series, and there's two data series, one is sales, one is quantities, are plotted on the vertical axis. This chart has two vertical axes because I have two different data series that have a completely different scaling that's appropriate for the values in the data series. On the left side of the chart, I have a vertical axis title called Millions of Dollars. The scale runs from 0 to 16. And on the right side of the chart, I don't have a title. That's the quantity, though, and the scale runs from 0 to 2,500. I chose to put a legend on the chart, which provides some guidance as to what the bars, in this case the green bars, are, which is sales, and what the line is, which is quantities. I've added some data labels, and these data labels have to do with the sales. And what might be sort of overkill in this case, I added horizontal grid lines to make it easier to visually determine the value of the plotted points. And finally, I added a chart title. So creating a chart in Excel couldn't be easier. There's several different ways to do it, and we'll cover those ways as we go through this video. And as I said in the introduction, you can either create a chart on its own sheet or you can create an embedded chart. I'm going to left-click the data, and I'm going to create an embedded chart by pressing Alt F1, and I get the default chart style, which is the column chart, with all the default settings as well. So I only have one vertical axis. And that being the case, when you plot the sales on the scale that belongs with the quantities from 0 to 2,500, the bars barely even show up, and that's the reason why I created two vertical axes on my chart. So when you create a chart, you get the Chart Tools contextual tabs, including Design, Layout, and Format tab, which also indicates to me that the chart is active, it's selected, and so I can press Delete and delete it. So that's what I'm going to do. I can also create a chart by pressing F11. And when I do that, I get a chart that's created on its own worksheet called a chart sheet. Like with any worksheet, I can rename this worksheet to be something other than Chart 1, something that makes a little bit more sense given the chart that's on it. If I create another chart sheet, Excel will name that Chart 2 and Chart 3 and so on. When I'm on the chart sheet, the Chart Tools contextual tabs are automatically displayed. A chart sheet can be beneficial because it's easier to see because it takes up the entire screen basically. It's easier to print because when you print the sheet, you'll get the chart. And it's also probably easier to find as compared to an embedded chart that's somewhere within a worksheet in your workbook. The downside to a chart sheet is that you don't have the display of the data that created the chart, which might be what you're after, but if you want the data displayed, you can add what's called a data table to the chart, and later on in another movie, I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to delete the chart sheet, right-clicking and delete. So that's a column chart. There are 15 different main types of charts, at least I've broken them into 15 different groupings, and there's a total of 73 styles of charts that you can choose from. I've color-coded the list of charts and the data to sort of match up when you would use one style of chart or another. That's subjective. It's sometimes art rather than science, but there are sort of general approaches that you can use to determine what style of chart you want to use to display what sort of data. So we've already looked at a column chart. We just created one. A column chart compares several items. A column chart can contain multiple series and multiple categories, and we'll get into those in later movies. A stacked column chart, and I'm going to first select the data, and I can select either all of the data or just a data point within that region, and then left-click Insert. And before I create the next type of chart, I'm going to launch the Create Chart dialog box and get a list of all of the styles of charts that we have to select from. Your dialog box may look a little different than this. You can grab the edge and extend it out, and so each one of the types of charts is displayed on its single line. There's actually 11 different groupings here that I've chosen to make a list of 15 styles of charts out of. The default style of chart is the one that's selected. I can change to another style of chart and then set that as the default by left-clicking Set as Default Chart. And I can also create a chart from this Insert Chart dialog box by double-clicking a style of chart that I want to create. In this case, I want to create a stacked column chart. A stacked column chart might make sense when you have two or more data series that are, one, depicting the same unit of measure, and two, that are components of a whole. In this case, we have domestic and foreign sales. Obviously, the unit of measure would probably be the same, or we would make sure it would be the same. We wouldn't want to have foreign currency combined with domestic currency. But the total length of the bar equals the total sales for the month, and each of the pieces of the bar, the blue and red, make up the domestic component and the foreign component. Another column chart option, and I'm going to press Delete, and go to the Insert tab, and then in the Charts group, left-click Column, and get the drop-down menu, and select 100% Stacked Column. Left-clicking that. This chart displays each bar for each month, filling the entire vertical length of the axis, going from 0 to 100%, and shows the proportion that domestic sales make up and the foreign sales make up of the total. So we get sort of a visual display of the proportionate mix that the data series make up for each one of these categories. Again, I'm going to delete that and then go back up to Insert, left-click Line, and then left-click Line Chart. Line charts are good for showing trends many times. And once again, we have the vertical axis plotting the values and the horizontal axis, or the category axis, displaying the non-numerical data. I'm going to delete that. And going on to number 5, a pie chart can be an effective visual display of information when there's one data series and each of the components of the data series are a piece of a whole. In this case, I have 4 sales regions, and adding all the percentages together, they sum to 100%. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab, the Charts group, left-click the dialog box launcher, and double-click Pie Chart. It's obviously fairly easy to see that the Eastern region had the lion's share of the sales, and all the other regions were just about the same proportion of the whole. I'm going to delete that. The bar chart, going back up to the red data, Insert, left-click Bar, and then left-clicking Bar Chart. The bar charts are very similar to the column chart, but instead of the vertical axis containing the numerical data, the vertical axis contains the category data. The categories in this case are easier to read. If you have long descriptors of the categories, a bar chart might be the way to go. There are stacked bar charts and 100% stacked bar charts that are analogous to the stacked column chart and 100% stacked column chart, except the bar chart plots the values consistent with what we currently see. The categories are on the vertical axis and the values are on the horizontal axis. Again, I'm going to delete that by pressing Delete. and we're going to create an area chart. Insert, I'm going to go back to the dialog box launcher where we have several different types of area charts. I'm going to select the first one. Area charts are basically line charts with the area below the line filled in. In this case, the quantities are on top of the sales, so you can't even see the sales. They wouldn't be very prominent anyway because of the values. And later on in another movie, we'll talk about how you can use a picture to fill in that area. So the area chart can show change in sort of a more dramatic way than the line chart. I'm going to delete that by pressing delete. And I'm going to go on to the green data, which is the XY scatterplot data. The XY scatterplot plots values on the vertical and the horizontal axis and depicts where it exists a correlation and can show a trend in the data points. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab, left-clicking Create a Chart, and then double-click on Scatter Chart. So the horizontal axis has the advertising spend, and the vertical axis has the sales dollars. And we can see the more that gets spent for advertising, the higher the sales dollars go. There's sort of a diminishing returns because for $1,000, we got $500 worth of sales, and doubling the advertising spend to $2,000 only increased the sales by $200 from $500 to $700. So if you were to draw a line through these points, it would begin to flatten out. So there's a diminishing returns for the advertising dollars in terms of increasing the sales dollars. I'm going to delete that and then go to the stock chart data. Stock data generally has an open, a high, a low, and a close that are the prices for the daily activity for a given stock. Many times you can also get the volume, and you can create a combination chart of a stock chart and a column chart. The column chart showing the volume. But going back to the Insert tab, left-clicking the dialog box launcher and going down to the stock chart, and I'm going to go to the second one because that has the listing of the same way I have my data, open, high, low, close. Double-clicking that, and I get a stock chart. The points that are black-filled show a decrease in the stock price. When they're white-filled, it's an increase in the stock price. The range of the line, the high and low points, are the high and the low for the day. The upper and lower boundaries of each of the boxes are the open and the close. So on January 2nd, 2012, this stock opened at a certain price and never went higher. It didn't close at its low trading point of the day, however. So I'm going to press delete once again. The next chart type is a surface chart. Before I create the chart, I need to explain the data a little bit. Of course, I made this up, but I've got 2-hour buckets of time where I have fictitiously counted the number of times, the frequency, that fewer than 5 customers showed up, or between 5 and 10 customers showed up, 10 and 25 customers showed up, or more than 25 customers showed up within each one of those 2-hour buckets of time. So between 8 and 10, I had fewer than 5 customers show up twice. I had 5 to 10 customers show up 3 times, 10 to 25 customers show up once, and more than 25 0 times, and so on. So I'm going to select the data. So what the surface chart allows me to do is to plot in 3 dimensions. I'm going to left-click the Insert tab, launch the dialog box, and then double-click the surface chart. The horizontal axis displays the buckets of time, the 2-hour time frames that I captured this data in. The vertical axis has the frequency as to how many times a given number of customers showed up during each one of those 2-hour buckets of time. And the third dimension, the depth, has the buckets for the number of customers that showed up during each one of those 2-hour time frames. Probably the most obvious thing that jumps out on the surface chart is we are busiest between the hours of 12 to 2 p.m. I'm going to delete that. The next type of chart is a donut chart. A donut chart is sort of an option to use as opposed to using a pie chart. I'm going to go to the Insert tab, launch the dialog box again, and double-click Donut. And it is possible to show more than one data series in a donut chart, but it gets to be a little bit visually confusing when you do that. So a donut chart is an option to a pie chart where you have one data series where the data points are a proportion of a whole. In this case, once again, we have 4 sales regions. Each one of the regions have a certain percentage of the entire sales, which is 100%. The eastern region being the largest with 45%. I'm going to press delete, and we're going to go on to bubble chart, which has that data associated with it. A bubble chart again allows you to plot 3 different dimensions of data. And this time I'm going to select just the numerical data for the bubble chart. Go to the Insert tab, launch the dialog box, and then double-click Bubble. And a bubble chart is basically a line chart, except for the size of the plot. The bubble contains and conveys some information. In this case, the horizontal axis are the number of products. The vertical axis is the sales, and the size of the bubble reflects the market share. So one might conclude from looking at this as the bubble on the far right represents an opportunity in the market, since we have a fairly large amount of sales, but a small amount of relative market share when you look at the other product groups. I'm going to delete that, and we're going to go to the last style of chart, which is the radar chart, and we're going to go back to this frequency information for our given made-up business. Go to the Insert tab, left-click the dialog box launcher, and then double-click Radar. The radar chart is a style of chart that many people aren't used to seeing. It can be probably a bit confusing, but each one of the categories is represented by an axis stemming from the center, where the value begins at 0 and then concentrically gets larger, in this case, to eventually equal 25. The values are then plotted on this structure, this grid structure, and so when we look at this, we can see that the most frequent occurrence of the number of customers that show up is between 5 and 10. And the shape of all of these plotted points sort of peak at and point to the busiest time being between 12 and 2, which is something that we saw on the surface chart as well. I'm going to delete that. So that's an introduction to charts. We first looked at a chart and looked at all the components of the objects that make up the chart in the chart area, or the canvas that contains all of those objects. And then we talked about the fact that we could create a chart that exists on its own sheet, a chart sheet, or we can create a chart that's embedded within a worksheet like we have here. Then we looked at the types of charts. There are 11 different categories of charts that show up in the Insert Chart dialog box that I've broken into 15 different types of charts. And within each one of those groups, we have more options that total a grand total of 73 different types of charts. And then we sort of walk through what chart would be appropriate for what sort of data that we're trying to visually display.